Hey, everybody, welcome to Shift Happens. I am your host, Joe Smith, and with me today, I have a whole panel full of people, and I'm super excited because we have a special guest, Representative Anna Eskamani out of District 42 in here in Florida. Thank you very much for taking time out of what is a crazy first week of the session and coming to talk to us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. And yeah, it has been wild, that is for sure. And we're just getting started.
Oh, yes. And everybody else, if you just want to jump in real fast, maybe start with Donn and just tell us who you are and what group you represent.
Sure. I'm Don Smith Lopez. I'm the Vice President of the Pride Community Center of North Central Florida here in Gainesville, and I am a former board member for Equality Florida representing the greater Gainesville area.
Tamara?
Hi, I'm Tamara Lunardo, and I'm president of the Pride Community Center of North Central Florida.
Hi, I'm Simone Chriss. I'm a civil rights attorney here in Florida, and I'm the director of the Transgender Rights Initiative at Southern Legal Counsel. We're based in Gainesville.
Thank all of you for being a part of this, and especially since we were able to throw this together kind of last minute. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules and coming to talk with us. I have invited Representative Eskamani to come and kind of share with us about what's being proposed in this new legislative session. The last several have just been, it almost feels like worse and worse and worse, and they're getting progressively more extreme. But there have been some, key victories, and we'll talk about those later, some light at the end of the tunnel. But I thought it would be very timely to just kind of like dive into what's happening right now. There's lots of stuff like on Reels and TikTok and certain bills coming up, but I just thought, hey, maybe we can talk to somebody that's actually in the middle of it. And I'm thankful you agreed. So I'm just going to let you start running with it and tell us what in the world's actually happening.
Yeah, thank you so much again for the invitation. And I really appreciate centering the conversation on the 2024 legislative session because, as y'all know, first of all, so much attention goes to national politics, which is important, which is a value, and folks need to be engaged at that level. But at the end of the day, especially when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community, so much of the day-to-day experiences and sense of safety and security, access to healthcare, access to schools, all of that comes out of the state legislature. And we have seen our state capitals become ground zero for extremism. And the only way to stop it is to be engaged, is to fight back, is to understand the process of legislation, how it moves, so that you can be a part of trying to stop it. And with that said, we are literally the first week of Florida's legislative session. It will be 60 days of hell, and anything can happen in these next few weeks. And so I'm sad to report, as folks have seen already online, several anti-LGBTQ plus bills that have been filed. You thought, I'll say I thought, like it was already really bad. And then you see these new layers of policies, and it's just sickening. It's sickening how far my colleagues on the far right want to go on this. And with that said, some of the bills, just to kind of elevate for folks that are listening, House Bill 599, we're calling this one the Don't Say Gay Trans at Work. So this is the third iteration of the Don't Say Gay Trans legislation. To refresh folks' memory, this was the bill 2 years ago where Republicans said, oh, it's just about kindergarten and third grade. It's no big deal. Just kindergarten and third grade. Stop panicking, right? And we literally never stopped panicking because we knew that wasn't the case. We knew it was going to get worse. And so you shift with the Board of Education, and now with the legislature. Not only have they expanded it to K-12, they're taking it into the private sector and into places of employment. They're really trying to target nonprofit organizations or contractual agreements with the state. And the reason why is that there's constitutional concerns here. Folks remember the Anti-Woke Act from 2 years ago is still being litigated. And now with similar legislation and going after conversations on race and bias training and so forth, where the courts basically said you can't dictate to a private company what they can and cannot do. So they're trying to get around that by going after public dollars that organizations may receive. So for example, any group that receives a state appropriation could be impacted. And then there are multiple organizations that receive state dollars, or maybe an organization like Equality Florida, whose contract is to do DI work or, LGBTQ plus support for a business. If that business gets the government contract, they cannot provide any type of support. What also makes these policies even more insidious is the prohibition on talking about pronouns and even asking about pronouns. And it essentially legalizes discrimination, because if you say something homophobic or transphobic and you just want to claim that it's your religion or your belief in biological science, however you want to define that, then you're allowed to get away with it. There is no accountability for you. So basically legalizing bigotry. And so that's House Bill 599. And I'm sad to say there's more. House Bill 1233 and House Bill 1639, which dropped right on opening day of session. These are two policies that specifically go after the trans community and the gender nonconforming community, as targeting driver's licenses, essentially forcing individuals to have their driver's licenses be changed, not reflect their actual gender identity. And it's even retroactive, even for someone today that's already gone through all of the bureaucracy and transitioning to have a driver's license that's accurate. When they renew that driver's license, they would essentially have to go back to a gender that no longer reflects who they are, which is really endangering to that person, but of course also just hurtful and demeaning and unnecessary and politically motivated. These bills would also force insurance companies to provide coverage to so-called conversion therapy, which is really fucking gross. That is a belief that individuals can just, quote, pray the gay away. And it has caused so much trauma already to our communities. And the fact that they would want private insurance companies to provide coverage is sick. The bill also, of course, goes after insurance coverage for gender affirming care, would force the coverage of detransition, which is going to, again, not only continue to feed into anti-trans rhetoric, but an insurance company is not going to do that, which means they're not going to provide any coverage for anyone. So that's a really quick synopsis. We also have legislation to ban pride flags being hung at government buildings, and of course other issues that intersect with the LGBTQ plus community, from abortion bans to policies impacting our schools. We don't see any new book banning legislation yet. However, this process is 2 months and anything can happen. Anything can come from anywhere. We do see, of course, policies going after freedom of speech. One bill to put on everyone's radar is one where you could basically be financially penalized for calling someone a racist or calling someone transphobic, which, again, serious First Amendment violation. And I find it ironic that the folks who call us snowflakes want to financially penalize people who call them names. But that is where we are in the so-called free state of Florida.
Oh my gosh, deep breath. So before you have to go, because you're not going to be able to be with us the entire time, you've got a limited amount of time. And again, thank you for just taking that amount of time and being with us. I don't want to send you off on just like, this trauma dump of legislation, right? I would love to know, how do you keep fighting? What's giving you like, okay, I mean, I understand, you're fighting against something, but there's got to be something more to that, right? Like, where are you finding that?
Sure.
What's like keeping you up and running right now?
Well, let me tell you, I just got an email from someone who contacted me wanting to participate in one of our upcoming events, but they were hesitant because they are trans. And not only are they worried about their personal safety, but, and this breaks my heart, they were worried about being public next to me and worrying that it could impact people's support of me, that I have a trans person participate in one of our events. And I was like, honey, like whatever you are comfortable doing, do with us. Like, we are all ready for it. Like, come join us, right? And it just breaks my heart that someone would even feel like they have to ask that question, right? And so I take so much pride in not only being someone that is helping to break these myths and these stereotypes, and you know, as an accomplice, right, as a cis hetero person, it is my fucking duty to be the mama bear and to push back against the transphobia, the homophobic slurs, and to really make like my fellow cis hetero people better, right? Like, that is one of my responsibilities. And so I take that shit seriously. And sometimes it also means that I can be persuasive in audiences, right, where other people might not have the same privilege that I have. So I have to take that opportunity whenever I have it. And it doesn't matter how tired I am or how exhausted I am, I have to fucking do it, because why am I here if I don't, right? Now, with that said, I also find just so much inspiration in the LGBTQ plus movement as a whole, because this is a community that's been through so much bullshit and yet continues to dance, continues to love, continues to be proud, continues to have joy. I don't know who else watched CNN on New Year's Eve. I was like loving it. It was like the gay news network, and I was so fucking here for it. Like, I was like, oh my God. And they had drag queens, and I mean, it was amazing, right? And I just loved it, because it was really just bringing it into you know, homes across America, right? Like, just pure joy with people that we love and trust, who also happen to be queer, right? And like, and I want to get to that point where like each one of us can just be ourselves and be joyful and not have to worry about what people think of us, and how we look and how we sound and who we love. And so I aspire for that world, and that's what keeps me going, because these are bills that are not going to build that world, honey. And so I'm going to keep fighting back. And but huge kudos to everyone here, to folks listening. I mean, Simone Chriss is a rock star. Like, I'm following Simone so closely and cheering her on with all the lawsuits that we're having. And it's also my job as a lawmaker to try to create a strong foundation for attorneys. So I also know that when oh my God, another bill that I'm going to see next week, actually, it's quote, single sex organizations. And it's all about prohibiting trans people from joining sororities and fraternities. Like, just so unnecessary. And like, again, cruel for the sake of being cruel. So this is coming to my committee next week. And I want to be able to be there to say to the bill sponsor that trans people are people and want to fit in and want to flourish. And how dare you stop them from doing that, right? And I'm hopeful that when more people like in my position, and people who can relate to me and share my values, when they see me ask those questions and getting these on the record, not only will they be inspired to do the same, but my goal in doing that is to set a foundation, not just for my values, but hopefully for lawsuits as well. Because if we can show intent by the bill sponsor and show that it is discriminatory in nature, then that can put a really great lawsuit in place, much like we saw with the drag ban. I mean, I fought that bill onto the last minute on the House floor, to a point where Randy Fine couldn't answer my questions anymore, because they were such fucking good questions. And I will brag about that. I did my homework. I'm not an attorney, but I was like, oh, I will absolutely like undress this guy on the Miller test, like, because he doesn't know what it is, right? He doesn't think anyone of us know what it is either. And the Miller test, those don't know, is all about the First Amendment. And basically, it unless you don't meet the Miller test, then like your freedom of speech is protected. Like, you basically have to not meet all three of this criteria. And I would argue that drag shows are artistic, drag shows are also political. They are protected by the Miller test. And so I was trying to get that point on the record, right, to show him that what he was doing was discriminatory. And sure enough, part of the work we did on the House floor, leads to these really incredible wins in court. So all that to say, it is always worth fighting, even on the darkest of days. It is always worth fighting.
I agree. And I don't know if anybody else has a question or two, but you've got to take off. I've got one more. When are you running for governor, and how can we vote for you for president?
Y'all are so extra. I love it. You're so sweet. Well, and just for the record, I have one more election in the state house. So we got one more term for some good trouble. And then, obviously it will be, thank God, an open governor's race, right? In 2026. I don't know yet what I'm going to do, but I will be committed to helping get a strong supporter for equality in the governor's office. And it would just be transformational for all of us. And so I'm not going anywhere. I'm committed to doing that regardless of what my next move is. I
have one request. Can you help make sure it's not any more old white guys? I'm just saying.
I'll do my best, honey.
Okay.
I'll do my best.
Well, thank you so much for the time that you had and spending it with us, and then just kind of like walking us through that really quick. And I know I can speak for everybody. We're just cheering you on from all of our places, and so thankful that there are people like you that are fighting on behalf of, all of us, whether we realize it or not. So just, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I hope to see some folks at Equality Florida's Day at the Capitol for Pride Day at the Capitol next week. So I'm looking forward to being there, and we'll just keep with the fight. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Well, wow. Number one, she is always a whirlwind of just like energy. I don't know how she does it. I'm thankful that she can do that. But so I this is the first time that we've done anything like this where it's just kind of like off the cuff. I would love to hear everybody's thoughts before, we really dive into anything.
Yeah, I was just thinking how terrifying this legislation is. Like literally, like Anna said, like if it couldn't get any worse than last year, it's heaped on now in tenfold. Where, if we as the Pride Community Center North Central Florida nonprofit organization happen to receive, let's say, state funds for the Department of Health for the critical HIV testing that is needed in our community, and we use proper pronouns every day in conversation with our members, with our fellow board members, with folks that we interact with. Does that mean if we happen to have that funding now and this legislation passed, we're at risk? Are we not allowed to give supportive DEI training to our members or to our fellow board members when we are an LGBTQ plus organization? Now, suddenly, what does that mean for our mission? I mean, it's just ridiculous. It is. I'd love to hear from Simone, like what her thoughts are on this, like the ludicrous level of
idiocy
of the legislation. Yeah.
I mean, like with, I think, every bill that has been introduced in the last 2 years in this state, a large piece of what it is designed to do by intent is create confusion and to create those exact questions of what can we and what can't we do. They are vague and ambiguous by design, just like they are cruel by design. But I think the Don't Say LGBTQ law sort of started us on this path of what I think has been successful from the folks pushing this anti-LGBTQ legislation, where if they don't define terms, if they don't make it super clear what is and isn't allowed, and sometimes through threat of criminal penalty, other times through financial and other such civil penalties, they know that folks will err on the side of caution. They know that folks will overcorrect, and whether it's removing books from classroom libraries that actually reflect a kid's lived experience, or being afraid to provide gender affirming care as a provider because you don't know if you're going to get arrested for a felony, or a parent, not allowing their child to socially transition or to access critical life-saving medical care because they think they might lose custody. With all of these, it's vague and ambiguous by design to force censorship and to try to deter support for LGBTQ people. And this is just another example of that. I think we're going to see some changes I hope, to the employment discrimination, don't say LGBTQ in the workplace bill. I think, unfortunately, the bills that I think have the greatest chance of actually being amended for the better are the ones where folks with financial interests, like health insurance companies and organizations that might be providing this training, folks with contracts who have money and who could support these candidates. Those are the ones that actually end up potentially being amended because of those other interests, not because of the human toll and the suffering that they cause.
Well, Tamara, I'm curious. What are you thinking? I saw some reactions and what she was saying, and I could you I don't know if it's good or bad. You never know, or you can always tell what you're thinking by the look on your face. And
I do not have a good poker face. Yeah, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I mean, what I'm thinking is that that I don't think that stuff like this just peters out. I think it ends in an explosion, one way or the other. I'm encouraged by the kind of fierceness that Anna has, and that Simone has, and knowing that we have people like that on the ground in the fight is really encouraging to me. But where I get really emotional, and it's been a couple times I've been trying not to cry on this call, is when I think of our people. I mean, as the president of the Pride Center, yes, I'm concerned with our organizational stability, but only because of the community that we are serving. I don't care if we exist as an organization in and of ourselves. That doesn't matter. What matters is the LGBTQ plus people that we serve. And so those people, real people, my family, myself, my best friends, are going to be and are already impacted. And I'm hearing the talk about the license, and I'm thinking of one of my dearest friends in the entire world.
Yep. Who
has been through his transition for over a decade. And I'm thinking of how much harm is already being done just by the suggestion that this could be a requirement, never mind it actually happening. And it is devastating and it's infuriating, but it also is a reminder to me of why, when I get tired of doing the work we do at the Pride Center, why, when I get frustrated with even some of the little nonsense politics that we have in our own organization, it's why I know that I need to keep doing what we're doing, because the people matter so much to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I thought about that too as I was listening to her talk about, and I'm just like, how does so and so feel about that? What is so and so thinking? And yeah, all I could just see were faces. Yeah. So Simone, we invited you on here. For those that don't know, she mentioned it earlier, but Simone is the one that is really helping bring lawsuits against these. And so a lot of times when you hear about something being ruled unconstitutional or ruled that, I don't know, Simone, if you're involved in all of them, but I know that you're involved in quite a few of them. And so that's why we invited you on here, was to kind of help walk us through what these bills say they will do and what they, don't say. Because I remember last year, I can't remember exactly which bill it was, but I remember, right off the bat, there was these huge rumors about, the state could come take your child if your child is trans. And, I know a handful of families that bounced, pretty fast, and some are still on the fence. And, so I'm curious, I know that we talked ahead of time, and so you have, information on these. So if you would just be willing to walk us through that, and then for the rest of us, if you ever got questions or anything, just interrupt and let's just keep talking.
Yeah, thank you. So last year we saw something really, in addition to just the horrifying nature and impact of the laws that passed, sort of an additional harm that our community, the LGBTQ community, and particularly families, parents of transgender youth faced, was the misinformation that was put out, not maliciously, but due to a not careful as possible reading of the law, when SB 254 came out. And SB 254, for those that aren't familiar, is the law that banned gender affirming care for minors and put restrictions in place for adults. Actually, we're the first state in the country to restrict care for adults.
Yay.
We've challenged that. We had just finished a trial in federal court on all of SB 254's provisions, impacting gender affirming care, and we hope to get an order soon. We'll discuss that a little bit later. But SB 254 also had this provision about custody, and folks understandably misunderstood that it meant your custody over your child could be impacted by you providing them gender affirming care or affirming them, supporting them. And that was really dangerous, because we know that trans youth, aren't always lucky enough to have parents that are supportive and affirming. And we also know that it's understandable that even parents that are affirming and supportive might be really afraid that by the very nature of providing their child the healthcare that a doctor says is necessary for them for the treatment of gender dysphoria, that they could lose their child. So a lot of people, were very, very afraid of that happening, left the state, kind of forced their children back into the closet because of fear of losing custody of them and things of that nature. And the reality is nothing in SB 254 ever allowed DCF or Child Protective Services or anyone to intervene in a family, to investigate, to remove a child. Rather, SB 254 involves out-of-state custody determinations, and we can get into all that if you think it's helpful or necessary, but basically it's court orders for custody outside of the state of Florida can be amended in the state of Florida if a court is asked to take temporary emergency jurisdiction to protect a child from receiving gender affirming care in their home state, which is very different than saying DCF or the child welfare system can get involved in a Florida family and take a child away. So unfortunately, we're seeing a little bit of a repeat of that with the new HB or SB 1722, which is about child protective services. Now, this time, it isn't. It is correct that it is within the dependency statute. So that means the foster care statutes, right? However, it is so important, and if folks only take like one thing away from this podcast, what I hope, and I'm sure everybody else has different ideas, but what I hope is that folks understand it 100% does not, and I can't be clearer about this, it does not say that treating your child in accordance with their gender identity, supporting them, getting them gender affirming medical care, any of that constitutes child abuse. What it actually says is that referring to and raising a child in a manner consistent with the child's, what they define as biological sex assigned at birth, does not in and of itself constitute child abuse. And what I want folks to understand is that's not a new right. They didn't create a new right for parents. Parents have always had the right to be terrible if they so choose. We have all met parents, and some of us had parents that didn't want us to be gay, that tried to deter us from listening to rock music or rap music, that told us we couldn't cut our hair when we wanted to, that told us we couldn't wear the clothing we wanted to. Parents have the right to control their child for the most part, right? Yeah. That's just how it is. So all this does is put in writing something that's always existed, which is a parent doesn't have to support their trans kid. It sucks. I disagree with it, but it's not a new right, and it doesn't make it child abuse to support your child.
I don't know if anybody else has a question of like why. I mean, it's already there, right? Like, of course.
You know why? Because there's enough evidence out there, and they know this, demonstrating that conversion therapy, which is trying to force someone not to be LGBTQ, is so harmful to a child that there is a world in which, I mean, I think it should be deemed child abuse to like actively refuse to support your child for who they are and to try to force them to be something that they're not, but it's not, right? That's not the case. And their goal, and the other provision that kind of goes hand in hand with this, is that a child can't be removed from a family based solely on the parent's religious or ideological beliefs. They're not trying to support those of us who think that that religion, that the Bible actually means love everyone for who they are, so you should support your trans kid, or that my ideological belief is that trans people exist and we should be kind and loving to everyone. They mean the parents who are fundamentally opposed to their child's existence, they can't lose custody of their child simply by virtue of that.
So when I was just reading an article, I don't know if you have any information on this or knowledge of this. I'm sure you have some, at least esoteric knowledge, is that there's a disconnect between the rulings at the federal appeals level for conversion therapy. I guess in Florida, it was ruled that conversion therapy was the bans, I guess, in South Florida were unconstitutional due to First Amendment rights. But then in other federal appeals districts, they didn't find that. They found that the conversion therapy bans were in fact constitutional and within the right of the state legislature to enact, or the local jurisdiction to enact those bans. So the article that I read, I can't remember all the details, but essentially it's almost like destined to go to the Supreme Court because of these conflicts within the rulings.
Yeah, we're in a place right now where it's like the Wild West in terms of federal litigation. It used to be pretty predictable that, like, regardless of what district court judge you might get, like the federal courts generally just used to be a place where the law was applied to the facts, right? And it was a system of checks and balances. And oftentimes, even when we had, an executive branch and legislative branch that might be far one direction, like typically the judicial branch could restore some accountability and maintain some semblance of like democracy and decency and equality. We're in a really weird place now where basically, depending on the judge you get, depending on the circuit that you're practicing in, like you may not even have a chance from the start at striking down a plainly, patently, unfathomably unconstitutional law. And what's happening is, because there's so many people that were appointed during the last administration that have really extreme, they are driven by ideology and not a desire to fairly apply the law. We are seeing more and more circuit splits where if two federal courts, come to a different ruling on the same issue, oftentimes the Supreme Court will take it up and resolve it. And that was really rare previously. And now I think we're in a place where the Supreme Court's probably going to hear a lot of these issues because so many states are passing these anti-LGBTQ laws, and so many states are so many folks like us in those states are challenging them. So there's just a ton of rulings, and inevitably, there's going to be folks coming down on different sides of it. So I don't doubt that a conversion therapy ban might make it to the Supreme Court. But I will say I have more faith in even the far right, more biased folks on the courts, their analysis of something like a First Amendment issue than, let's say, access to gender affirming care, right? Because the First Amendment doesn't just protect us, right? The First Amendment is why folks can patently lie about trans issues and about access to reproductive health care and about all the things. Without consequence. And so they have a strong interest in preserving the First Amendment. And so I feel less concerned about maybe that making it up than some of these other laws.
Yeah. That's just so much. Anyway. All right. Well, how about we just jump into what Anna was talking about? Like that House Bill 599 that she mentioned. Maybe you could walk us through that and just kind of, what's it actually say, what it doesn't say, potential impacts, and then Donn, Tamara, if you guys have any thoughts or comments or questions as she's talking, just feel free. I don't want to speak for you, Simone, but just feel free to, interrupt and ask, because I'm sure whatever we're thinking, that's what the people listen, they're thinking too, and they're wanting to know too. So yeah.
Yeah, so for 599, and it's House Bill 599, Senate Bill 1382, I think folks are rightly, deeming it like the Don't Say LGBTQ law for employment. It's taking some of those same concepts that are so harmful in schools and applying them to the employment context for folks that receive any funding from the state. And And, one of the things that this does, and I think it's pretty consistent across all the bills they're introducing, is just this notion that you can redefine sex. And they're redefining it in a just inaccurate, there's no really other way to say it. Like, it's just wrong. It doesn't take into account all of the multifaceted things that we know, scientifically evidence-based, make up sex. And it redefines it in a way that basically erases transgender people and erases intersex people and erases large parts of our community. And that's kind of the goal. And it again uses the language that it's false to ascribe to a person a pronoun that doesn't correspond to their sex assigned at birth, which is, I think, just generally a very harmful principle. But basically what this law does is it makes it so that an employer, so a nonprofit, any employer that gets money from the state in any capacity can't force people to use the right pronouns with others, right? So if somebody wants to misgender their colleague over and over and over, in the normal world, that would be deemed harassment. That would be deemed, conduct that we hope would be disciplined, and that person would not be allowed to do that. In the same way that if you called someone a disparaging, derogatory term over and over, one would hope that would not be allowed in the workplace. It's just making it permissible to misgender others. It makes it so that you don't have to provide your pronouns if you're asked, which already wasn't a mandatory thing. And makes it so that you can't get fired or be subjected to any disciplinary action or anything for your deeply held, religious or biology-based beliefs. So basically, you can be terrible to trans people and not get in trouble for it. One thing I do want to clarify, and there may be, and Donn, please jump in if I'm missing something, or Tamara, you guys may know more about this than I do, but from my reading of the House and Senate version of this bill, what it makes illegal or unlawful is for a nonprofit or any employer who receives state funding to require training on LGBTQ issues. But I don't see language that would make it the reverse, illegal for a nonprofit to provide training on these issues. So, if the Pride Center or Equality Florida or someone wanted to go in and train, let's say, a school on LGBTQ issues, or the judges on the bench in the 8th Judicial Circuit or something of that nature, they wouldn't be in trouble for doing so, but the employees of that place, the school, the court, whatever it is, can't be forced to undergo that training. So it can't be like part of your orientation is LGBTQ cultural competency. A person could say, nope, I don't believe in that, and get up and walk out, and that's fine. So that's my understanding of it. But again, if I'm missing something, please tell me.
Well, it reminds me, and you're the expert, so I'm not going to disagree with you. It reminds me, though, of last year's bathroom bill, in that it's about giving permission to discriminate. So
Exactly.
requiring discrimination or anything else, but it's permitting it. And those things are really scary to me because it's not an outright requirement. It seems like it's easier to convince otherwise rational, fair, kind people that maybe that's okay. It's just permitting it. And so it seems to me like the slippery slope, like the insidious way of getting dangerous things happening in our state, because it's, well, we're just allowing, we're not requiring. But then I think that it does something besides the legal ramifications. I think it's also doing something in your mind. Well, if that's allowed, is that because a kid like me shouldn't be the way I am? Is it because a kid like me, like, because I'm wrong? My parents were right when they said that there's something messed up about me. My parents are right. Like, this conversion therapy is probably something I need. Like, the way that it will mindfuck our children and adults too, the way that it will erode at people's own sense of self is, to me, even more frightening than whether someone is permitted or not permitted to, require a pronoun. Like, it's when it gets to the heart of what this stuff is doing, that's where I get terrified.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about on the other side of that too, and maybe this is just because of our different perspectives, growing up. All I could think about when she was saying that is like, this is going to give people the ammunition that they're already looking for a way to be jackasses, you know, and now it's like it just gives me permission to do so. Well, I can't get in trouble for it. As a matter of fact, wink, wink, it's fine. You know what I mean? And all I'm thinking about um, is along with just so many of these other bills that are being proposed that just, taking away waiting periods for firearm purchases, lowering the age, open carry, just more and more guns, more and more violence. And then it feels like that some of these bills where they just like open the floodgates, it almost feels like it's all part of just this sinister, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like, I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but it just, to me, it just gives people that are already looking for a reason to be jerks. Here you go.
Yeah, it's emboldening, right?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
a political ploy too in a presidential election year. I mean, and with a governor who clearly is running on a particular agenda, and I think these particular bills and what they say and who they target speak to that political undercurrent of their supporters. And it's a really easy thing to, gang up and bash trans people. And because it doesn't, to them, it doesn't affect their supporters and their group because, oh, a Republican or a right-wing person, they wouldn't be transgender. Really? There's no way, right? So, and of course, it's ridiculous to say
Right.
it tongue in cheek, but also it just really just speaks to the undercurrent of the political environment that we are all in. And it's an easy win for them. It's an easy checkbox to say, oh, look what we've done, to protect our children, or look what we've done, to make sure that, trans folks aren't indoctrinating, the most vulnerable folks in our communities. It's just ridiculous, clearly. But it's for political points.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that what you're talking about is something that we've seen happen before, right? Like in the civil rights era in Florida with the Johns Committee, who was ousting UF professors and professors across state universities, ousting them for being gay, ousting students. The reason that gay people were the target was because Black people were no longer an easy target. They were too strong. The NAACP was too strong. So Black people couldn't be targeted. So gay people were the next scapegoat. Now, in this generation, we have marriage equality. The vast majority of Americans are actually, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, they're actually in support of gay rights. But now our transgender friends are the ones who are the easy target. And it's just moving on down the line through, let's find the next target. And that's exactly what's happening. And so I really appreciate Simone and what she does, because she is fighting for this scapegoated community, which I have friends that I love dearly. And one of the things that Anna says that I really love too is about how she doesn't see herself as an ally, but as an accomplice. And she's willing to do the shitty work that has to be done. And that's what I want to do, because honestly, as much as I'm a part of the broader LGBTQ plus community, as a bisexual woman, I am not the target of these bills. And so I have to, just like Anna, like I feel like I have to be doing what I can in my own way, in my own sector. For me, it's not in the legislature, it's in the community. But, I think there's something we can all do. We all need to be an accomplice wherever we can. And I mean, this is every single bill that is out there now and that has been in the past year. I really feel like is targeting our trans and intersex LGBT members of the LGBTQ plus community. And it just reminds me again and again that like, we can't be complacent. We can't be quiet. We have to speak up and do the work, and we have to be there for our family and our friends, because they're under attack. You're right, Donn. I think it's completely a political strategy. It's not meaningful to the people on the other side of it, but it's very meaningful to our friends whose identities and life is being challenged.
Well, I think I also think that one of the really sinister undercurrents of this, and Tamara, you kind of hit that the historical aspect of it, is that you've got that really fundamentalist right wing American, white Christian nationalism that has a historical thread through the American church, and how you can see through history, like starting with like that Barry Goldwater, where he took like this really extreme position. He lost, but the people that ran that campaign, there's still a few of them alive, and they're still involved with stuff. They're still involved with like Moms for Liberty, and their acolytes and their disciples are the ones running this, and the dark money, and there's always an enemy. It was yeah, like you said, it was our African American community at one point, and then when they lost desegregation, then it moved on to abortion rights and gay rights, and now it's on to trans rights, and it's yeah, it's just it's one of those like dinner bells. I don't really care, but boy, this brings in the money. Some people
What
care. I'm sure that some of them
people
care.
like I don't think people really recognize, and a big part of my job in doing federal litigation and challenging all of these things in court is demonstrating that the justifications that are put forth for these are not legitimate, right? And when you look at the history, right, and we're talking like the history of the oppression of all of these communities, when you actually boil it down and you realize that they're regurgitating the same
Yeah.
bullshit justification for all of them. Protect the children and protect women from Black men. They are inherently dangerous. Protect the children, Anita Bryant, protect the children from the gays, right? We are inherently dangerous. We're more likely to be pedophiles. We're going to groom them. Protect the children from having to compete in sports against someone who might be better than them. That's the biggest fear, right? Protect girls and women from bathrooms where they might be with a trans woman. Now protect children from gender affirming care because they can't possibly know what they're doing and make a decision. Like, protect the children is just this regurgitated amorphous thing that they make fit whatever it is their goal is. They make that the argument, because people who are uneducated and people who are not familiar with any of this are so easily made afraid of what they don't understand. And it's such an easier lift to pretend you're protecting children. Like, did you guys see that the Medicaid ban we challenged, right? The entire time, the slogan, there's buttons, there's hats, there's a whole website called Let Kids Be Kids. All of it is let kids be kids. That's their whole thing. Let kids, they don't mean let trans kids be kids, let them die, but let cis kids be kids, right? All of it says let kids be kids. Then we see the actual report that comes out and the rule that comes out, and they ban Medicaid coverage for everyone for gender affirming healthcare, adults and minors. It was never about children, but they led everybody along with their, their trail of protecting children. And then no one cared that, oh, we got misled. Actually, it banned it for all adults as well, who I think no one is in a position where they're like, yeah, adults shouldn't be able to make their own healthcare decisions. Like, even those who might think that about children, which they're wrong, but still, it's all of it is a guise for the eradication of a community that they don't like.
And what's really ironic about that is you've got, in the circles I run in or ran in, that was a big sticking point, was about kids protecting kids. And I think that we've seen over the last few years, especially where people have really been keeping track of it. There's a person by the name of Christy Broad, I think is how you say her last name, and she's in South Florida, but she started a website called who'smakingnews.com. I encourage everybody to go to it, and there's a ton of data on there, and you can track it and all. And do you know how many nationwide of the 6,249 cases of crimes against children, there have been 4 transgender people nationwide, but 530 people of religious employment. People of religious employment make up 14% of all of the people that commit crimes against children. And so I'm wondering, when is there going to start being legislation to mandate training for pastors and Sunday school teachers and youth pastors to actually protect kids. But you won't hear that because it's not actually about protecting kids. It's about, like you said, positioning power and scapegoating, you know, certain groups.
Well, I think that's a strength that we have in our favor, is that for us on the opposite side of that fight, it is about protecting the kids. It damn sure is about protecting the kids and the adults. I'm my mother's 44-year-old kid, and believe me, she will throw down. Like we have actual skin in the game. For us, it is our families, it is ourselves, and I think that's, there may be money on the other side, and that goes a hell of a long way, and influence. But I think for the other side, it's not really motivated by protecting anybody, other than maybe some politicians' pocketbooks. So, I at least feel some solace that we've got the moral high ground, and yeah, that I am a mom, and I am going to protect my kids. You better fucking watch.
Ditto here. Yeah.
Simone, what was that other one that she brought up? Was it HB 1233?
Yes. That's the one that basically redefines sex for purposes of the entire Florida statutes, but it also, and we know that they've been inching toward this. They've tried to do this through other bills previously, and it hasn't been successful. But this would sort of remove legal recognition of trans people. So I don't know if folks are kind of aware of this, but years ago, like in 2018, we negotiated a policy change with the Bureau of Vital Statistics in Florida to get them to allow folks to update their birth certificates to reflect their affirmed gender, without having sex reassignment surgery, which is what was required previously, which basically meant no minor in the state could amend their birth certificate and be treated affirmingly at school, et cetera. So anyway, after SB 254 passed and it didn't include this provision that would ban birth certificate amendments, the Bureau just took it on themselves to find a different reason to stop amending gender markers on birth certificates. And they've just completely stopped doing so under this weird new interpretation of an existing rule. It's garbage, it's ridiculous, but I think they did that as a stopgap measure, knowing that this next legislative session, something would pass that would ban that. So this makes it so that you can't update your gender marker on your birth certificate, but also says that for your driver's license, you have to sign an affidavit saying that the gender marker on your driver's license matches not your birth certificate, but your original live birth certificate filed at the time of birth. I'm a trans rights lawyer, right? And I've been doing name change work for years. I've helped tens of thousands of people. What people don't realize is it's not just trans people that need to update their birth certificates because they were wrong at birth. Like for trans people, it's that, their gender marker was wrong at birth. They were assumed to be a gender that they're not, and they later realized it was wrong. I have so many clients that are cis who are old, whose midwife, they wrote it was a clerical error. They did the gender marker wrong, or they did the name wrong, and they've been living their whole life thinking their name was this and it's that. And I've helped so many people update their birth certificate who are not trans. And so these people are going to have to sign an affidavit saying, actually I'm male or actually I'm female, when that isn't the gender with which they identify, nor their sex assigned at birth, but it was just a clerical error. And if you don't, or if you sign the affidavit and it doesn't match your original birth certificate, they can revoke your driver's license, which is something that typically only happens if you've committed a crime or failed to pay child support. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of bad reasons that states will revoke people's driver's licenses that I don't agree with, but to put a trans person saying, yes, this is my gender in the same category as the other bases upon which you revoke someone's driver's license is bananas. And so it would do that. And then the other piece of this bill, and they try to this one's called biological sex, and they fit in all this crazy shit from all these different areas to try to confuse people and make it so that it's really hard to tell what the bill actually does. But it would make it so that if a health insurance provider, state or private, covers any gender affirming care, they also have to cover detransition care, which, as Rep. Eskamani noted, will just make it so that no one wants to cover gender affirming care because the risk is so great the cost is so great for having to provide detransition care. So just yet another way to deprive trans people of medically necessary health care.
Before we move on, I know Tamara that you're going to have to leave here in just a second. I didn't know if you had any final questions or thoughts for Simone or anything before you left, or I didn't want you to just have to disappear.
Yeah, no, thanks. I don't think I have any questions right now, but I really appreciate you, Simone. You are such an awesome resource for our community, and I really hope we'll be able to do a town hall and again, like we did last year, and really help the community to understand what things do and don't mean, maybe after the legislative session wraps. So thank you so much for all you do. Thanks, Joe, for hosting. Thanks, Donn, for being my right-hand man. I gotta go. Love to everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Tamara. So I had a couple of questions for you, Simone, and I'm sure Donn does too. I'm thinking along the lines of like, not only like with mistakes in a birth certificate that, let's just say, I'm trying to think the last time I even looked at my birth certificate, I'm assuming it's got my name right and stuff, but I don't really remember. But what happens, and I'm thinking about somebody that that I know, that I'm close with, that is very masculine presenting. If they chose not to tell you, you would never know. What does that do for, let's just say this goes through, and I'm thinking, what about somebody who gets pulled over, and let's say this person I'm thinking about actually goes and does the legal thing and changes all the stuff, and now this driver's license says that this person is supposed to be a female driver, and they're bearded and deep voice, and you would not think I'm a female, right? And but if I set this person next to me, we look the same.
Right.
I'm just thinking, okay, well, what are the ramifications as a police officer? What do I do then? Does that mean like I'm just thinking like there's just so many things that's just like it just make sense. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, and I can't make it make sense. I wish I could, but the answer to your question is they don't think about it. The problem is they don't think about the ramifications beyond this will hurt trans people, and they almost always are operating through the lens of we don't like trans women. We don't want what they think of men who are presenting as women and tricking the world. And that's have you ever seen someone, the guy you're talking about, walk into the women's bathroom?
Yeah.
These people would beat him up, right? They don't want him in the women's bathroom, but they're mandating that he use the women's bathroom.
Yeah.
They don't, it's like, did you think about that trans men exist too? And the answer is no, they didn't, because they're so obsessed with trans women. It's creepy. So I've trained police departments, right, on exactly that, on de-escalation, but the opposite of like, if you take someone's ID and they haven't yet updated it, which so many people don't have access to the process. It's hard, it's confusing, it's expensive. It's go to FloridaNameChange.org if you need help. It's a website I created to walk people through the process. But a lot of people have an ID that doesn't reflect their gender identity. So a cop's first instinct when they see an ID that looks so like, I can't conceive a world where like this is this person, their immediate assumption is this is a stolen car, or this is a stolen ID, or something untoward is happening, something nefarious is going on. And that, I mean, understandably so, because of the way that they're trained, which is not on this stuff, they think, okay, this is like, it escalates quickly, even just inside their own body, right? Because they're like, something is wrong. And the trans person might be way more nervous and anxious and like acting, more erratic than they otherwise would be, because they're terrified that they're about to get... Exactly. So
Great.
And when I train police departments on this, they're like, no, we had no idea. Like, we've never heard, we didn't know that this was a thing, or no, we had no idea what it takes to change your name and gender marker on your documents. Like, they get no training on like these basic interactions that they should understand. So all this is doing is putting more police officers at risk. I'm saying that because that's something they might actually care about, at risk of being in a heightened situation unnecessarily, and more trans people at risk of being in an unnecessary conflict with an officer for literally no reason.
Yeah. Donn, what are you thinking?
I'm actually thinking like, could we trust the voters of this state, the populace of this state, to put forward a state constitutional amendment to protect gender identity and sexual orientation, sexual expression. Obviously, we can't trust the legislature to do what it's doing because it's going to continue to do this, I think, in tenfold. They're going to get wins and wins and wins through the legislation and continue on this path of battering trans and others in the LGBTQ plus community. So are we at the point, are we literally at the crossroads where the only protection we have is the state constitution, and that the process is not easy to go about an amendment to the state constitution? There's a huge threshold. There's roadblocks along the way. There's, the actual petitions that have to be signed. There's requirements for all of that. But it has been done and has been done successfully to stop in the tracks the legislation, bad legislation that continues to come up. So I'm wondering, that was my thought, is I'm wondering, are we really at that crossroads where like we need to put effort, money, time, energy into a protection at the constitutional level in our state? It wouldn't be easy, that's for sure. And it would take a lot of political power to do it. It would take a huge organizational effort, but we've seen it more recently in reproductive rights, where they've just crossed the threshold for that. Of course, there's the hurdle of the state Supreme Court of the language to make sure that it meets, all of those requirements. But it's not something that can't be done. It is definitely doable, but it would take the willpower to actually make that happen. And the language would have to be so well written in that potential amendment.
I think Anna and Tamara both sort of noted this earlier, but like, I think the only chance of something like that happening and being successful is if we are part of it, like sexual orientation and gender identity, because it's true where we're at in terms of like public understanding, awareness, acceptance of us as gay people versus where we're at with public acceptance, awareness about trans people. It's like we're in different decades. Like we left them behind when we got marriage equality and we're like, okay, we're done. We have like gay rights. And I don't think people understand that the exact same arguments about why we were dangerous to children and we shouldn't be allowed to get married and we shouldn't be allowed to adopt are the exact same arguments they're using to deny trans people just like basic human rights to exist. And I think when we couple ourselves and we say they are intertwined and they are not separable, like it is just the basic human right to exist the way that we were born, maybe we might have a chance, but if we make it separate in any way, just gender identity and expression, I think that people just are so ignorant about gender identity.
Agreed.
Does there was a recent study that came out that talked about remorse rate for people who had transitioned, and they found over, I can't remember the exact number of years that they tracked it, but it was like less than people who regret getting a tattoo. I mean, it was less than the rate for people who have breast augmentations. I mean, it was less than things that are just like common everyday things. So I'm wondering, is there any possibility that would insurance companies be so scared off by that premise that, like you said, and like Anna said, it would force them to say, well, we're just not going to do anything because we don't even want to worry about it? Is it going to be that big enough a headache? Or does the actual numbers, the actual data, the actual science behind it be like, we're talking percentage points of a percentage point, and it's really not going to make a difference?
That is such an interesting question and such a good point. So the reality is the state has tried to make detransitioners seem like this huge group of people, right?
There's only a handful of them. Look it up. Only a handful in the nation that are funded by these right-wing groups, and they bring them out on stages and blah, blah, blah. It's only like 5 people.
Guys, when the order comes out in the lawsuit I just finished trial on, Doe v. Latipo, challenging SB 254 and the Board of Medicine rules, you're going to see, and I can send you some documents to show this, we put it in evidence, the state literally manufactured testimony, excluded Floridians that took the day off, traveled across the state to attend these meetings to share their lived experience as a person in this state of Florida getting gender affirming care that they're trying to ban, and instead stacked the deck with these same like 10 detransitioners that have spoken at every legislative hearing and committee meeting across the country. They're paid to do this. They're basically actors. And they filled the record with that to make it seem like it is a more frequent experience than it is. So no, I do not think that the reality is it would be financially unwise for these insurance companies to cover this care, because so few people actually regret their care and detransition. This care is provided in accordance with standards of care that are evidence-based, and for that reason, people aren't receiving this care if they don't have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria and don't really need this treatment, right? However, what I think the deterrent is I don't know if you guys have seen, like Chloe Cole is a very well-known detransitioner that goes around telling other states to ban it because she regretted it. Like, sorry, my mom like regrets her knee surgery, but she's not an activist saying no one should ever be allowed to get knee surgery because she didn't like the outcome of hers. That's fucking crazy. So anyway, but like people like Chloe Cole are now bringing these really expensive lawsuits against providers and insurance companies saying, I regret my transition. You owe me millions of dollars because of all the pain and suffering and, you know, maybe potential future infertility or, you know, whatever it might be. And it only takes a few people to, you know, not bankrupt, but like really make a financial nightmare for these folks. And I think that the way that I read it is someone could have gotten care in a state where it was covered, you know, California, somewhere that isn't like batshit crazy like Florida, but then they could come here, get on any insurance, and then, you know, make them pay for their detransition. And so part of this, I think, is what I have been deeming like DeSantis is trying to create a safe haven for bigots, trying to make it so that Florida is the state to come to if you're in a good state and you don't want your kid to get care, or you don't want your kid to learn that LGBTQ people exist in school. You don't want, you know, abortion to be legal. It's like a safe haven where you can come and be horrible and get your way, even if your way is wildly unconstitutional. So I don't know that it'll actually be a severe deterrent to insurance companies, but that is the fear, that they will just not worry about covering it affirmatively because of the fear of how expensive it could be for even a few detransitioners to sue.
And so then I think in the opposite vein is DeSantis also wants to incentivize our trans brothers and sisters and those of the LGBTQ community to get the hell out of Florida. That's why Tamara mentioned, I think Joe mentioned, folks are getting the heck out of Florida for that very reason, because they have a trans kid, or they're a transgender person themselves, or they're afraid of what the law is going to be next or the next year after that. And why fight the fight? Not everyone can fight the fight. They want to live their life as we all want to live their life, as any, you know, citizen of Florida should be able to live their life. Would it be easier to go to a state where they didn't have to deal with this kind of stuff? Of course it would be. Absolutely. And I think the politicians that are on that side, that's one of the very reasons why they're writing these laws, is to say, bye, see ya, good luck with your life. But welcome, like you were saying, welcome to Florida. Look, we're anti-woke. You're not going to have to deal with trans people in this state because we're fighting for against them for you, you know, new Floridians or good people of Florida. That's exactly right. So it's like they're buttering their bread on both sides with these laws and stoking confusion, which is exactly what something you said at the very beginning of our podcast. It even like as a Pride Community Center who throws an annual festival, you know, the legislation stoked confusion with us. The anti-bathroom bill, the anti-drag bill, even though there was an injunction against it, you know, we had to take steps as a small nonprofit, you know, all volunteer board to kind of protect our organization, to protect the local community at our Pride Festival because of the confusion in these laws where they didn't make sense. So I think the innate thing that most people do is to protect themselves, to say, well, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to step back because I don't understand this law and it seems like it's going to affect me somehow in a negative way. So I'm not going to do anything because I don't want to break the law, which we've all been taught as good citizens not to do. And so You know, we decided as a Pride Center not to do that. We would have Pride. We would have our you know, our bathrooms were available for anyone that, you know, however they express their identity, their gender identity. And we also had drag performers on stage throughout the day because we are a community event, and drag artists are always welcome in our events.
Yeah, well said. Simone, well, you too, John. I want to be aware of like, your time and be, you know, I don't want to keep you all day, but Simone, you know, just listening to this, and we kind of talked about this ahead of time. For those listening, we had a phone call yesterday, kind of prepping for this. And as I'm listening to all of these things that we're talking, you know, I can internally feel, you know, my blood pressure going up. I can feel, you know, the anger, like it's physical, right? It's like very visceral. Um, and on one hand, um, you know, it is disheartening because it's just like, my God, man, how many more times? Like, why? What's the point? You've already said it. We get it. I mean, what more can you do? And on the other hand, it's just like, all right, damn it, let's go. I'm ready. Let's do this. I'm lacing up my boots. We're getting ready to go 10 rounds, you know, and however long those 10 rounds go, let's just keep going. But I know not everybody's that way. That's part of my personality. And so I want to make sure that before, you know, we get off of this call, that maybe you can share some good news with us because y'all are doing good work. Like there's a ton, and I think we don't hear it enough, right? Because it's all these big things like this that are coming out right now, and we miss the headlines that are happening and all of the hard work and the fights that's done behind the scenes. And there have been some real victories. And I would love to kind of like wrap up our conversation with that and kind of end on a high note.
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely it's both hard to inject the good news into the conversation because there's just so much bad shit to deal with. It's like there's just not time for it. But also, I find some days it's like it almost feels insensitive for me to mention something good when there's just so much devastation going on. But then I remember, like, if people feel hopeless, they win. The only way that they win is if we stay afraid and hopeless and really uninformed. And so I think it's so important that we are talking about the wins and talking about the hope that things will get better. So just really quickly, you know, we've challenged like almost every law that has actually gone into effect. The Medicaid ban was sort of the beginning of this really multifaceted attack on gender affirming care holistically across the board. And we challenged the Medicaid ban that banned care for all adults and minors for our most vulnerable Floridians. Like, it's just so despicable to take a targeted group within a targeted group within a targeted group, right? Like, trans folks on Medicaid are those who likely do not have access to other insurance and are low income and or disabled. And to target them and strip them of access to care for no reason is just insidious. But anyway, we challenged that in a case called Decker v. WIDA. And in May, we had a 2-week federal trial, and we brought in every expert in the country that is an actual expert on this care. They use the word expert in a way that is different than we do. And we were able to demonstrate that the ban was based on no science or evidence and based solely on a desire for people to not be transgender. And so we struck that down. We got an order in June saying that it violated the U.S. Constitution's Equal Protection Clause, the Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, the Medicaid Act, et cetera. So that was a huge victory for all trans adults and minors on Medicaid in the state of Florida. Then we challenged SB 254 and the boards of medicine rules that banned care for minors. In the beginning, you'll remember it was just a ban for minors. Then later, they added these restrictions for adults. And we were able to get a preliminary injunction, which means the court blocked it from being enforced. And it's been blocked since June 6th of this past year. So minors were able to continue accessing care, which has been great. And then we went to trial in December, and we hope in the next week to get an order from Judge Hinkle in the Northern District of Florida striking down, if all goes according to plan, the minor bans and the restrictions on adults. So those are the, you know, requirement for in-person and the terrible informed consent forms that are just filled with misinformation. And the ban on APRNs and NPs prescribing care, which we know many trans adults get their care from non-physicians who are just as capable and qualified to provide this care. So hoping for good news soon there. The same judge that issued the order in Decker on the Medicaid rule is the same judge for this case, and he is excellent. He's very well informed and very fair. So fingers crossed there. We also have a lawsuit challenging the pronoun ban, where trans teachers are not allowed to use their affirmed pronouns and either have to be out or like outed to everyone or misgendered or leave the profession, which is what we've seen many folks do, which is so shitty because like it's so hard for trans kids and LGBTQ kids to see themselves reflected in like the professions around them and to aspire to be all the things that they see the adults doing in their lives. And so to strip them of the few trans teachers that exist is just inhumane. Anyway, we challenged that. We have a preliminary injunction hearing set for March in front of Judge Walker, who's also an excellent judge in the Northern District. I'm really excited about that. And then we've challenged the bathroom ban and the Don't Say LGBTQ law and other things that I don't have great updates on at the moment because, like I said, it's the Wild West in terms of what judge you get. But those big cases, I feel very, very hopeful and very positive about, and we've got some great victories thus far. And I just hope people know, like, and hear, if they're listening to this and you've heard so much negative, you know, bad information and scary stuff, like, we are not going anywhere. We are going to keep challenging everything the state does. And it doesn't matter whether we are winning or losing right now. It doesn't matter what the state is saying. Like, the law is on our side. The facts and the law are on our side. We are on the right side of history. All of these things are unconstitutional, and we will demonstrate that. We will get them struck down. It is not if, it's when, and we will keep fighting until rational people in positions of power listen and come to the right decision.
Amazing, Simone. Thank you for fighting that fight every single day. Those are great wins, amazing wins.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I can't imagine the amount of people that you know, that it affects, like, in a positive way, that, you know, there was, like you said, hopeless over here, but all of a sudden, like, oh wait, okay, good. Oh, whew, you know, I can still do these things. Or, you know, for that teenager, oh, I can still go see my doctor. I can still, you know, so yeah, just to echo what Donn said, just thank you so much. Donn, do you have anything? I want to honor your time. You guys have, yeah, we have gone well over an hour, but this was so good, and I'm excited for people to see it. Simone, is there a way for people, like a simple step, that if you could offer that, offer a suggestion of one way that people that are just listening, that are here in the state of Florida, one way to get involved? Is there something they can do that's, you know, accessible for most people that you can think of?
I mean, honestly, the number one thing that you can do to help the community, and honestly to help me and like those of us that are on the front lines fighting this in court, is educate yourself about what these laws do and don't do and how they affect people, and then tell others. Because most of the people who I think are in the worst positions in our state right now, and whose mental health is just suffering, and whose anxiety and depression and fear is so high, it's because they don't understand. And there's so much misinformation out there, and everything seems so scary. But when you look at each law separately and you boil it down and you dissect it, and these are analyses that I put out regularly, so contact me if you need help understanding these things. But take what we shared today and tell 10 people. Like, that is literally one of the most effective things that you can do. And, you know, go to our website, southernlegal.org, and there's lots of resources. Also go to Equality Florida's website and join them in, you know, protesting and lobbying and meeting with lawmakers, and, you know, just showing up to show that the state of Florida does not support these measures, because I think the rest of the country thinks that we do. And it's so important that we show everyone that this is not how most of us think or feel.
Yeah, that's great advice. And we'll make sure that all of that's in the show notes. And so you can just, if you're listening, you can just scroll down and click those links and you can get to those places, and you can get involved, get educated and get involved. Thank you both so much. And I want to thank Tamara and Representative Eskamani for taking the time out of their day. This was so good. And I think it's going to, while I think it's going to anger people, like in a good way though. And I think it's also going to be really encouraging for people to really, all right, let's dig in. This is, this is going to be the fight. So let's do this. So thank you both so much for everything.
Well, thanks, Joe, for highlighting this important information and the subject matter. And by the way, I love your shirt. I was like,
yeah,
you finally stretched at one point.
Yeah.
I love the shirt.
Yeah.
I need one of those.
It's just enough sarcasm and just enough assholery that I can get away with it. But
Perfect.
Anyway,
Well
yeah.
said. And knowing you like I do, Joe, right on the money.
Well, thank you both very much. And thank you everybody for listening. And like Simone said, if you found this to be like encouraging and educational, share it with people. We don't monetize any of this. So this is literally just getting information out there. If you have any questions, give us a holler, click those show notes, and thanks for listening, everybody. Now you all get out of here. Go love on some people.